Good evening, everyone, and we'll call this meeting to order. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that our meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. Now, number 3 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. We have a draft motion that council approve the agenda for the January 23rd, 2024 meeting as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Halverson, a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Bertels. All those in favor? Right hand. All those opposed. Second, we're to the approval of the minutes. A draft motion that council approve the January 9th, 2024 meeting minutes as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Bertels, a seconder. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Ernst. Is there any discussion, question? Councillor Halverson.
It's just like to draw, there was one error in the minutes. I believe I sent an email to everybody in the council. The motion was not read. That I believe. Oh, I figure which motion you got here. The first motion was to waive notice, but then the second motion about amending a motion previously adopted at the November 14th meeting, that motion actually was never read into the record. What was voted on was something about November 23rd, and of course there was no meeting on the 23rd. So I think we should reflect that in the minutes, change that however it needs to happen here to make it accurate.
Thank you for that. Well, basically what we can do, we've had some legal advice on this, obviously with all the correspondence and media coverage we've been getting on that meeting. So what we'll do is we'll go back, because to be quite honest, and I'll take the blame for that, I didn't read any of the actual official motions out, because if you go back and look at the actual meetings of council for the last 15 years, motions aren't read out a lot, but tonight we're going to start following our policy again. So we're going to go back then and we're going to reread the 4 motions that weren't read out. When they're read out, then we move them, second them, and then we can, once that is done, then we approve the minutes as presented at that time, if everybody's okay with that. That's what we've been told basically by legal we'd have to do. So, okay. So the first motion was moved and seconded. The council agreed to waive the required notice to amend the motion, which appointed Councillor Halverson as deputy mayor. So that's the first motion. So do we have a mover and a seconder, I guess, to that motion? So moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Now, do we have any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Carried. Second motion is moved and seconded. The council agree to waive the required notice of motion to select a new deputy mayor. Is there a motion mover for that? Second, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. That's fine. We'll put the term though in just to make it clear. So now the following motion is council nominated Councillor Ernst for the role of deputy mayor, which Councillor Ernst accepted. So it's been moved and seconded the council appoint Councillor Ernst as deputy mayor until the last meeting in October. It's been moved. Do I need a mover? Been moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Mayor, that motion should read until the regularly scheduled last council meeting in October prior to the 2024 election.
Okay. Is everyone aware of what they're voting on then? It's the last regularly scheduled meeting in October. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those any question on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Motion carried. So now that we've moved all the motions that weren't read out at the last meeting, can I have a mover to accept the minutes as now currently amended? So move it, Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Duggan. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Motion carried. So now we move on to the public input and questions. Now, before we get to that, I just want to update with something I've said earlier. This council has brought in a a 20-minute session at 3 minutes a person. So we're going to give you 21 minutes if there's 7 of you, because it's easy math. So, but we're going to keep it to your 3 minutes. And when your 3 minutes is up, I'll give you a 15-second countdown, and then I'll hit my little buzzer here at the 3 minutes, and you'll be done. That's just to follow our policies and procedures. Unfortunately, we have no AAA batteries for our thing here, so we're going to use CAO Doyle's phone. So that's why I'll just say 15 seconds left while you're speaking. I don't want to cut you off, and then we'll give you a little buzz. So the first name on the list, and we have 5 in person and 1 virtual. So we'll do the in-person first and save the virtual for the end, if that's okay. So the first person on the list is Paula Rennie.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. My name is Paula Rennie, and I represent Friends of Blockhouse Hill. There are 3 motions of concern to Friends of Blockhouse Hill on tonight's agenda. Before making consequential decisions, council owes it to their constituents to conduct proper due diligence. As we have seen in the past with both the Queen Street decision and the vending bylaw public hearing, a failure to ask detailed questions can have profoundly negative consequences for our community. On October 20th, 2023, we requested copies of all correspondence between Parks Canada and the town of Lunenburg from 2018 to the present. The correspondence is interesting, not so much for what it shows, but rather for what it doesn't show. We suggest that council ask staff the following questions. Were Parks Canada and thereby UNESCO informed of the 2017 legislative change affecting our common lands, the 2021 amendments to the LUB and MPS and subsequent zoning changes on Blockhouse Hill, the proposed changes to the buffer zone prior to the sale of 3 lots for development in 2017 and 2019, the proposed changes to the buffer zone prior to the declaration of 6 lots within the buffer zone as surplus lands, Ms. Grant's current recommendations that Blockhouse Hill be declared surplus and that a public information meeting be organized on selling that public land. If Parks and UNESCO were informed of the above, what was their reaction? If they were not informed, why were they not informed? When did Parks Canada officially inform the town of Lunenburg that they had to see design proposals before taking any action? With respect to the legislative and zoning changes and plans to sell Blockhouse Hill, and with respect to the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple design process and workshops, at any point was the Indigenous community asked to provide input? If yes, what was their reaction? If no, why not? The town of Lunenburg staff have consistently maintained over the past several months, and again today, that the buffer zone was not created until 2017, despite letters to the contrary in 1994 between UNESCO and Parks Canada. Will council please ask staff to explain that discrepancy? It is our sincere hope that the mayor, deputy mayor, and councillors will seek answers to these questions on behalf of all their constituents. We request that all the information provided by staff responses be made public. As always, Friends of Blockhouse Hill are available to share and discuss our findings and to answer questions. After 11 months, council, we still need to talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was 2 minutes and 59 seconds. So great. So the next speaker is Tom McPhail.
Hello again. I'm speaking about two related things. I happen to be the vice president of the Folk Harbor Society, but because the Folk Harbor Society board hasn't had an opportunity to look at the proposals for the redevelopment or changes to the bandstand, I'm speaking on for myself rather than on behalf of the board. Folk Harbor Festival is Lunenburg's largest arts event. Each summer, more than 1,000 people come to Blockhouse Hill to experience 40 to 50 musical performances during the long weekend. The festival main tent and site occupies more than half of the top of Blockhouse Hill, straddling Blockhouse Hill Road from the Lunenburg Board of Trade's Blockhouse all the way to Kemp Street. There are also 5 or 6 other venues in the town that are used for part of the festival, but the tent location is the largest. The festival attracts musicians, audiences, volunteers, donations, and media coverage from across Canada, the US, and Europe. Festival weekend brings about $3 million into the local economy. That's for the weekend. So most of the schemes that we've seen over the last, I don't know, number of months being proposed for Blockhouse Hill will almost certainly dislocate the festival, either temporarily during construction or permanently. The issue on this issue alone is alarming to Folk Harbor because there isn't any replacement site for the festival main location. There was a request almost a year ago for more information and consultation by the Folk Harbor Board to Council. There was one single contact about it, but there has been no other contact with town staff or any of the consultants on the project about either the problems or the opportunities for Folk Harbor and the town's largest arts event. I could stop there, but I think this problem might be repeating itself with the 3 schemes being proposed or discussed for Town Square. Folk Harbor also presents about 30 bandstand concerts each summer, all summer. There was a comment, I think, at the November meeting that there might be 75 bandstand amphitheater seats provided in one of the new schemes. But this is actually the smallest crowd for the Folk Harbor concert there. Audiences typically range from 75 to over 200. At a blockbuster concert at the bandstand, such as Ashley McIsaac, attracted over 600 people. So now I'm concerned that the inadequate research and planning might also displace the largest user group on the bandstand, either temporarily or permanently. And on this one as well, there's been no contact by council, town staff, or any consultants with Folk Harbor on this proposed project. Folk Harbor Society overall presents just short of 200 performances in Lunenburg, and development on Blockhouse Hill and/or the bandstand has the potential for dislocating half of that activity.
Excuse me, Mr. McPhail, but you have to stop, okay?
Thank
Thank
you.
you. I hate to do it, but you have to. We have to follow our policy. Thank you.
Name's McFall for the record. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, but thank you. Next is Rachel Martin.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors. My name is Rachel Martin. My questions are about option 2 in the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple report and the accompanying staff report. And they really are questions, so I'm hoping perhaps in the presentation section later in the agenda, they can hopefully be answered. I'd like to confirm my reading that the $20.6 million in site development costs for option 2 will be covered by the developer and not by the town. The staff report indicates that this project will require an upgrade to the water system transmission main and upsizing other mains in Blockhouse Hill area with an estimated cost of $19 million. I'd like to confirm that this cost is not in the $20.6 million. And what is the plan to cover this cost? The staff report suggests that this project would require a capacity increase to the wastewater treatment plant, in addition to that currently being planned. So my question is, why is it necessary to ask council to approve this recommendation at this time before it is known whether this would be a necessary additional cost and what that cost could even be? The 20.6 million site development costs include about $1 million for electrical infrastructure on the site. My question is, will there be any additional infrastructure costs incurred by Lunenburg for electrical infrastructure related to this project outside the site area? Now I'd like to I have some questions about the studio accessory dwelling units. And are these units intended to be self-sufficient units? That is, will they have electricity, water, sewage, a kitchenette? Is the intention that these could be rented long-term by the owner or tenant of the adjacent unit? If they are not long-term rentals, I don't understand what is the logic of including these as 26 of the 256 units. If they are not long-term rentals, then isn't the number of units in this plan 230, and then the effective average cost is higher? The staff report discusses the need for affordable housing. Will there be any requirement for the development to meet any affordable housing criteria? That's the first question. My second is, using the costs from the report, the average unit cost before land costs is $501,000. From an affordable housing perspective, this cost seems too high, either to buy or to be an affordable rental property. I note, however, that this average was calculated spreading the site development costs over 256 units. And it seems to me that's not the way, arguably, it should be done. Those costs should be spread on based on the size of the units, so we can get a better idea of what the cost range of these units is to determine whether or not any are affordable. So my question is, can we get more data so we can figure that out? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Heather Langell.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. I'm here to speak on the recommendations dealt with in the memo Blockhouse Fill Visioning Report and Design Options. I would like to urge you that before making such an important decision and voting on such an important motion, you retire this and put this to a plebiscite. Plebiscite is the purest form of democracy. This is a huge decision. I think that the people, the voters of Lunenburg, deserve to have answers to all their questions and deserve to know all the facts. I recall last autumn, there was quite a uproar regarding a document produced by the Chief Administrative Officer that contains some interesting accounting that suggested that every household would have to reach in their pockets and pay $500 to support the Lunenburg Academy. I would think that the ratepayers of this town would be incredibly interested and would want to have a voice if they're going to have to reach even deeper and come up with the kind of money to support the infrastructure that's going to be required to have a housing development of this nature if option B is indeed selected. There's a lot of other questions that I think people deserve the answers to, and I think that they should be asked and they should have the information regarding the following: a legal opinion that the town properly acquired the land in the first place, because there is some doubt about that. A full review of the housing needs report, including a discussion of its findings, the assumption behind those findings, and whether that's even germane to the question of selling that prime land on Blockhouse Hill. An estimate of the cost to perform the appropriate impact assessment inclusive of the required stakeholder engagement on the outstanding universal value impact of development within the UNESCO buffer zone in compliance with UNESCO guidance on impact assessments. A review of the green space assumption that contends that 53% of option 2 is left for green space. A full review of the assumptions around the town's wastewater and other infrastructure impacts. A copy of the archaeology report, if you don't already have it, and a legal review of what could be shared in redacted form for public review. A copy of the report by Hanscom Quantity Surveyors, including a review of their credentials in making these projections, and of course, discussion around the accuracy of these projections. A complete review of the survey results from the listening sessions and other public input. Thank you. And of course, all findings from the above should be made public. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Allison Strachan.
Am I on? Okay, I'll start by saying my name is Allison Strawn and I live at 46 Lorne Street in the town of Lunenburg. I am speaking tonight with two comments about assertions made in the January 23rd staff report. And I also will briefly touch on the signage for Sylvia Park as discussed at the last meeting. I believe council needs to exercise the third alternative set out in the staff report and delay a decision until we have a full report returned from Parks Canada and in turn UNESCO. So my first comment is about the archaeology report. And my question is, what happened to collaboration? I was taken back by page 3, which basically says that limit artifacts is low. At the consultation, I asked the archaeologist who came to my table whether there had been any consultation with the Mi'kmaq. And I was told that Roger Lewis, who I am very familiar with, a qualified curator at the Nova Scotia Museum, but she wasn't aware of any others. Because the report is being kept from the public, I don't think that there was any other consultation. It struck me because in 1991, Lunenburg was identified as a National Historic Site, and the Standards and Guidelines for the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada, a collaboration document that is included by the province of Nova Scotia in its issuance, refers to Indigenous consultation. Well, I stopped counting at 5. It seems to say that the best practice is to have consultation whenever possible. So I'm curious because in other parts of Nova Scotia that are National Historic Sites, there have been collaborations, and I'll pass this along to you, your worship. But, you know, I think we skipped a beat. This could have been set in motion with the Mi'kmaq in 2023 through an open and frank discussion. I don't want to be cut off, so I'm going to move to costing. At the bottom of page 3, I quote, "Union rates are assumed for the work." My late husband was Peter Greer, who negotiated every single collective agreement and project management and most voluntary recognition agreements for mainland carpenters in Nova Scotia between 91 and 2004, and he would be ecstatic about that. However, my practice was in management side law, and I know that that cost calculation will send a clear message to contractors and subcontractors in Lunenburg County. Think local, that the project is contemplated to be under a project agreement and that they will be not on the site unless they sign a voluntary recognition. And a voluntary recognition often becomes a boogeyman for small contractors after a project is over. So how much time do I have left? Okay, Sylvia Park. Staff may want to visit the records at St. John's Anglican Church, where baptism records show the spelling of John Creighton's servant as Silvia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And now we have Townie Anderson on virtual. So we have him, Michael. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. My name is Townsend Anderson. I reside at 55 Townsend Street. I was reminded recently of Councillor Mosier's question at the November 28th, 2023 Town Council meeting regarding the development under consideration for Blockhouse Hill. Councillor Mosier asked, when can we possibly have someone come here and definitively tell us that what we are doing is perfectly acceptable? What would put us in jeopardy of the UNESCO site? What would put us in jeopardy of the UNESCO site? The town is in jeopardy now, Councillor Mosier. Parks Canada is evaluating a request to permit development on Blockhouse Hill against a backdrop of a World Heritage Site that is already at risk. Being a term of, at risk being a term of art in the publications of the World Heritage Committee. Old Town Lunenburg is at risk of delisting because of a perilously inadequate system of management and controls and regulatory actions contrary to the protection of the site. Specifically, actions taken by the council in 2017 and 2020, 2021. All of this is detailed in the report submitted to UNESCO on November 8th, 2023, entitled Report on a Threatened UNESCO World Heritage Cultural Site. What we learned, Old Town Lunenburg and its buffer zone. I urge the council not to proceed any further with consideration of this development until you have received whatever UNESCO may deem necessary to return Old Town Lunenburg to a World Heritage Site in good standing. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's no other presenters. I just want to thank everyone for abiding by the 3-minute rule and speaking tonight. And it really wasn't a hearing on Blockhouse Hill tonight. So there'll be lots of opportunity in the future to, speak. And at public presentations, I think you get 5 minutes, not 3. So you'll actually get a few more minutes at that time. So we're going to move on. There's nothing on number 6 under presentations. We'll move on to number 7. The first item is 7.1, REMO 2023-24 budget variance update. I will read the draft motion. Then we'll get someone to move it second it. We'll have some discussion and move it from there. So the draft motion is to council and approve an additional $1,030 for the Lunenburg County Regional Emergency Management Organization, i.e. REMO, 2023-24 budget in support of the REMO Advisory Committee's motion to approve an additional $20,200 for their 2023-24 Lunenburg County REMO budget. Do I have a mover on that? Moved by Councillor Sanford, a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Halverson. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. Second item under correspondence 7.2 is appointment of the Lunenburg County Accessibility Advisory Committee community members. There was an opening. So the draft motion is that council support the Lunenburg County Accessibility Nominating Committee's recommendation and appoint Gregory Novak and Louise Hopper to the Lunenburg County Accessibility Advisory Committee, each for a term of 3 years. Is there a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Deputy Mayor Ernst. Any question, discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand, please. All those opposed, thank you. And then the 7.3 is just for correspondence at this time, which was a response to what we heard. Under number 8, there are no public hearings or public information meetings or appeals at this time. So we'll move on to number 9 on the budget, which is business arising and unfinished business. So again, we have a draft motion in front of us. So I will read the draft motion. Someone can move it and second it, then we can discuss it and move on. So the council amend the motion previously adopted at the January 24th, 2023 meeting, which stated the council approved the development of an economic impact study analysis and the council approved including $50,000 in the 23-24 draft operating budget for the economic impact study analysis. And that the study not proceed until at least $50,000 worth of matching funds are provided by non-town sources, with at least $10,000 coming from every partner of the study. To remove that requirement of $10,000 must be provided from each party of the study. So that's what we're removing. So is there a mover on that? Moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion, question? Councillor Halverson.
Just where this has taken now over a year to kind of get this far, just a question, perhaps through the chair of the CAO, when would we expect to see the results of this study.
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, it's hard to determine how long the study will take, because I don't know what the scope would look like, as we're just approving the funding right now. This is running through the community development group. So Hillary, if you have any further information aside from that, please share. If not, then we'd have to wait until the RFP is out, successfully bid on and awarded before we know what that timeline is. I would suggest it would take quite some time, probably the better part of a year, to go through the process and understand the different seasons, especially the tourism season, to understand the economic impact assessment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Any other questions, concerns, discussion? Okay, call for the motion. All those in favor of that, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. So we're going to move on to item 10.1, which is the Blockhouse Hill Visioning Report and Design Options. So we're going to take a quick 3 to 5 minute recess for the consultants to get ready, if you'd like, and everybody can move around for a minute. And then I just want to let you know that this is not a public engagement session, it's an information session. So kindly just sit and listen to the presentation. And if you have any questions afterwards, just submit them in writing to either staff and we'll deal with it that way at this time. Like I said, there'll be lots of time to ask questions down the road. So thank you very much. Let's take a short recess. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order, and we're going to start with Hillary Grant, Director of Community Development, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I pass it over to the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple team to make their presentation, I'm going to quickly review the staff report and possible next steps for the Blockhouse Hill design project. Conserving our town and what makes it unique comes at a cost to the town, businesses, and homeowners. The town has an impressive land and building portfolio that urgently needs substantial investment. This work is vital to Lunenburg maintaining its World Heritage status, as was detailed in the town's 2023 State of Conservation Report, which was submitted and accepted by Parks Canada. The town is also in a housing crisis. The town has already done a lot to entice residential development on privately owned lands under our new land use bylaw. For example, allowing as-of-right development and eliminating parking minimums. But this isn't resulting in enough housing quickly enough to meet the community need identified by the province. With both these pressures in mind, Council directed staff to explore using some town-owned lands for housing, including Upper King Street and Blockhouse Hill. Exploring design options for Blockhouse Hill gives Council tools to consider the pros and cons of using Blockhouse Hill for housing and the option to control what is eventually constructed on site if Council chooses to sell. All the options in the visioning report are viable. Staff are recommending option 2 because it is a compromise between green space and heritage concerns and housing and fiscal sustainability. Option 2 includes housing, but also 53% public green space and extra green space between new homes and Old Town Lunenburg compared to option 1. Option 2 wouldn't require an archaeological mitigation and includes greater connectivity than option 3. More roads and pathways connecting areas of town and Sylvia Park to the Back Harbor Trail. It has all these amenities, as well as the second highest unit count, making the most of the site for housing while mitigating other concerns. But again, I want to stress, in staff's opinion, each option is a good option. None of the schemes touch Sylvia Park or the campground. They leave at minimum about a third of Blockhouse Hill public green space. All the options meet all the town's policies and bylaws. No amendments would be needed to pursue any option. All the roads have been reviewed by engineers and meet all requirements around, for example, safety. Something to consider is that more people mean more water used and waste produced, and our systems would need upgrades to accommodate new residents on Blockhouse Hill. These upgrades and their costs are included in McKay Lyons Sweet Apple's visioning report. The cost estimates provided have the developer carrying all of these costs. Totals provided include money needed for all upgrades, as well as new streets and services, Totals also include a developer profit. The costing report is publicly available as part of this agenda. Another point to consider is that Blockhouse Hill is within the Old Town Lunenburg World Heritage Site buffer zone. UNESCO's World Heritage Committee designates buffer zones to safeguard World Heritage sites from detrimental development. Development is allowed in World Heritage buffer zones, and the lower slopes of Blockhouse Hill were zoned for residential development when the World Heritage Committee listed Old Town Lunenburg as a World Heritage Site, and when the World Heritage Committee created the Old Town Lunenburg World Heritage Site buffer zone in 2017. Only the World Heritage Committee can vote to create a buffer zone. No vote was taken until 2017. We are beholden to what the committee votes on, not any reports that may be submitted to the World Heritage Committee. If the World Heritage Committee expected Blockhouse Hill to be owned by the town and left as unmanicured green space in perpetuity, Blockhouse Hill should have been included in the World Heritage Site proper in 1995, not in a buffer zone in 2017, and reference to its value should have been included in the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value, which has been reviewed by the World Heritage Committee on multiple occasions. Julian Smith, who founded ICMOS Canada and drafted the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape, did a heritage assessment and feels none of the options threaten Old Town's World Heritage status. The staff report and visioning report before you were shared with Parks Canada on Wednesday. While we cannot compel Parks Canada or the World Heritage Committee to provide an opinion on this matter, we, as always, welcome their comments, and we hope to hear from them soon now that the visioning report is complete. There is no timeline for them weighing in on this project. The motions proposed are possible next steps in the Blockhouse Hill design process, along with the alternatives for your consideration. Declaring the land surplus does not mean the town is going to sell the site, and it doesn't mean discussions move in camera. Declaring the land surplus triggers the public consultation process outlined in the town's land divestiture policy. Before council could move to sell Blockhouse Hill, council must hold a public information meeting under this policy. This meeting would be very similar to a public hearing where anyone would be able to come and speak to you on the issue on the record. Council could choose to stop the process after the meeting and would be in no way obligated to sell. Voting on a design option tonight is also not a vote to develop or sell Blockhouse Hill. It is, however, a vote to continue with the design process. McKay Lyons Sweet Apple's contract includes writing development rules and design guidelines for Blockhouse Hill. These rules could lead construction should council choose to sell or otherwise develop the property through, for example, a development agreement or covenant. If council were to put a development agreement or covenant in place, these rules would travel with the land titles, so they would remain in place in perpetuity, even if the land changed hands in the future. Directing staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple to write development rules does not tie council to using them. Staff would bring forward the development rules at a later date so council can debate, discuss, and propose changes, and then decide if they want to put them in place. Entering into a development agreement would also require a public hearing before council, which could happen concurrently or separately from the public information meeting under the land divestiture policy. If council opts to move forward with a development agreement, it would take approximately 8 to 12 months to put in place. With that, I'm happy to introduce the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple team, including, for the record, architect and urban designer Brian McKay Lyons and architect Miranda Bailey with us here in person tonight, heritage expert Julian Smith, costing expert Raymond Murray, and engineers Andrew Forsyth and Kyle McIntyre joining virtually. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship and Lunenburg Town Council. Thank you for having us this evening. My name, as Hillary mentioned, is Miranda Bailey. I'm an architect with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects. Over the last 5 months, we have been working together with our consultant team to come up with 4 development options for the Blockhouse Hill site. Tonight, you will hear from some of our team, including here, our design lead, Brian McKay Lyons, online joining us, Julian Smith, and as well available for questions, we have Andrew Forsythe with Design Point, Kyle McIntyre with Dylan, and Raymond Murray with Hanscom. Also, as a part of our team, Courtney and April are not with us this evening, but they're with Davis McIntyre. They completed the archaeological study, which, as you know, is withheld at this point from the public as it's still going through the approval process, but a draft has been sent to town staff. So for those who followed us moving along, you'll know that we're at the 4th workshop at this point, entitled Direction. 3 workshops have been completed to date, and the summary of these workshops is available in the What We Heard report. And thank you to all who participated through all the different workshops. So tonight we'll be presenting highlights from our final report, focusing on the 4 development options. Julian will start and take us through the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. Then I will outline our site parameters and assumptions. Brian will take us through the housing typologies that we've included in the development options. We'll spend most of the time tonight going through the 4 options that will be presented, starting with precedents for each of them, looking at the site plan and the various features, and then the housing and a breakdown of unit counts as well. And lastly, looking at some conceptual renderings to get a feel of the proposed neighborhood for each of the options. Lastly, we'll close with a summary slide that compares kind of the options, looking at unit counts and estimates as well for each of the options. So one thing I wanted to mention before we got started is in working towards this presentation, we did note a small error in it's Appendix C in the population growth and how it was added into the water and wastewater upgrades. We've since made those amendments. So there is a revision for Appendix C and Appendix A, which we will send to Town Council for review. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Julian, and he'll be joining remotely.
All right, thank you, Hillary. Do you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I think it's good to start with the UNESCO designation because that really provided the framework for the entire consultant team study. So if we go to the slide that has the, I can't see the slides, but the slide with the yellow and green map. So this map shows, this is the UNESCO map on file, which shows both the designated area and the buffer zone. And I just wanted to talk briefly about that. The designated area in yellow, a 34-hectare area, is the area that contains the outstanding universal value that was deemed by UNESCO to be of sufficient significance that created the World Heritage designation. The values that they identify as being particularly important, one is that the 18th century grid survives relatively intact, so the layout of the town, the pattern of streets, and so on. Secondly, that there is a 250-year tradition of vernacular wood architecture that has been sustained, that is used not only for the residential buildings, but also for commercial institutional buildings. And third, they do identify the important connection of Lunenburg with the Atlantic fishery, while also recognizing the enormous pressure on that value right now. The green area of the buffer zone includes the Blockhouse Hill study. So that's really important to understand as a buffer zone. And I just wanted to emphasize a point that's already been made, that the outstanding universal value resides in the yellow zone. And UNESCO twice in its designation makes this clear. The first time simply by saying within the boundaries of the 35-hectare property, which is the yellow area, are located all the elements necessary to express the outstanding value, universal value of Old Town Lunenburg. And they repeat the same statement in slightly different words later on. But there is a role for buffer zones, and as Hillary has said, it's, to quote UNESCO, to provide for the effective protection of the nominated property. So then the question is, how does a buffer zone protect Old Town Lunenburg? What are the roles that it can play to protect Old Town Lunenburg? And in our study, we've identified, from looking at other World Heritage cities in particular around the world, what are the two most important aspects that UNESCO looks at? And one is visual compatibility. And the most serious interventions here are high-rise buildings and really prominent industrial plants or infrastructure like bridges. So Dresden was delisted because they built a new bridge which blocked all the traditional views of the town from the river banks. And in Moscow, the issue was the Gazprom Tower, which was a 60-story tower in the middle of the old center of St. Petersburg, where traditionally the church spires have defined the nature of the skyline. So visually, if any new development on Blockhouse Hill does not interfere with the view of Old Town Lunenburg from the front harbor or along the streets within the Old Town, then there is no visual impact of development on the outstanding universal values for UNESCO. And UNESCO does require impacts if there's going to be significant impact to evaluate. If there isn't, they would have something on file if a development is approved. But I did want to address briefly the question, is Old Town Lunenburg a World Heritage Site at risk? And it's certainly not a World Heritage Site at risk. If it were, that's a major decision. Before the committee would make that decision, they would send a group of ECOMOS experts to evaluate Lunenburg. Hillary would have spent most of her time in the last 2 years or whatever responding to that. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. Christina Cameron, who's the past chair of the World Heritage Committee, and that's the most important committee in this whole issue of World Heritage designations, because they decide what to designate, they decide what to put as a place at risk, what to put as a place in danger, and what to actually de-designate. And her comment to me about this Lunenburg study was that if Lunenburg can develop a contemporary intervention in the buffer zone that helps the Old Town Lunenburg survive as a healthy community, that would not only be a benefit for Lunenburg, it would be a benefit for other World Heritage sites around the world that are dealing with the pressures of tourism. And to underline that, the most recent recommendation for a UNESCO heritage site being put on the danger list was Venice, because the pressures of tourism have pushed affordable housing out of the city. They've pushed the ability of people to live their normal lives out of the city. So the other part of it, besides visual, is functional. Anything that happens in a buffer zone should provide functional support to protect the values of the designated property. And so the team has worked very hard, and Hillary has mentioned this, to provide ideas on how to functionally support a viable community within Lunenburg. And Lunenburg is already feeling the effects of global tourism, but those will only increase with time. And that's a very serious threat to the integrity of World Heritage sites and their outstanding universal value, because Lunenburg was designated as a living community. There is a whole separate issue of what they call archaeological sites when you have a community no longer inhabited. And UNESCO is very concerned about the viability of those communities. Otherwise, the whole question of World Heritage designations is being called into question. So I'll close there. I just wanted to say that this is, we have tried in the developing the 4 recommendations to work within what to us is a fairly clear framework of the designated area and the buffer zone. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. So I'm going to take us through some of the site parameters and assumptions that apply to all of the development options that you'll see when we get to going through the 4 options. So firstly, everyone is very familiar with the site by now. It's highlighted in yellow on the image here. We have the trail at the base of the hill, adjacent to the back harbor. At the top of the hill, highlighted adjacent to the site again, is highlighted in green, is Sylvia Park. We have single-family homes on Hobson Street to the west of the site. We are adjacent to the historic town grid on Kempt and Creighton Street. And a narrow portion of the site connects to Saw Pit Road to the east of the site. So in terms of zoning, as Hillary mentioned, we looked at, and all of the current options do meet these zonings. So we looked at the use, lot, and form zoning. I did want to highlight the use zoning here, as it does divide the site into 3 sections. Now we use these colors because they do tie into the buildings, as you'll see later in the options. The low density the low density residential is highlighted in yellow right here. We have medium density residential in orange, so that's near the top of the hill. And then in red would be the high density residential. And this was important because it started to determine what housing types you'll see in these different zones. So the next item I wanted to highlight is our approach to developing on the steep slope. From the outset of the project, we were thinking of strategies for building on the hill. And we basically developed kind of principles that you'll see applied to all 3 options that show housing on the hill. So the houses are stepped up the slope, which provides a view kind of above the house that sits below. This is just a diagram that's illustrating the same strategy. Down at the bottom here, you can see on the street and the way that the houses meet the street. Houses that sit lower on the hill have a 2.5-story front on the street, whereas houses on the higher portion of the hill have a 3.5-story face on the street. In behind, in the middle section of here, you see the backyards, the private property in behind the housing, which is split to make up grade again. So there's a retaining wall that brings us up basically another story. And then again, 1 more story to the next street. So it is a significant change in slope across, and this is just a typical section, I guess, looking through. The variance is made up in the retaining wall, kind of in the center. So we did figure out quite early that the vehicle roads should follow the contours of the hill. So you can see the vehicle road through the lower section and upper, which meant that going downhill was too steep, like directly for vehicle traffic, which allowed us to use a green street strategy throughout the site. There was a few benefits to doing this. I'll just mention a few because you're going to see them in all the options here. The green streets allowed us to break up the housing. So we didn't have continuous streets with repetitive housing. It allowed us to make kind of the blocks that a normal street intersection would. It also allows us to kind of slow down traffic. We narrowed the streets anytime there was an intersection of a green street and a traffic street. So the roads and curbs narrow for sidewalks for pedestrians to cross through. So these are things that you'll see as we move through the 4 options. I just wanted to highlight this as well. We included this table from the 2023 Municipal Housing Needs Report for the town of Lunenburg, as this is what we use to determine the unit type breakdown. So the projected need for the 1-bedroom, and I highlighted here, 1-bedroom and 3-bedroom were at the same at 29%, and 2-bedroom was the highest at 42%. So we applied these percentages to the framework of the 3 development options that included housing. And you'll see that in the unit breakdowns when we get a little bit later into the 4 options. Just wanted to highlight that that's where that came from. So now I'm just going to hand it over to Brian, and he's going to go through a look at the housing typologies that are used in the development options. We did explore more than shown here, but it's basically where we landed.
Your worship. The people here tonight will recognize a lot of what we're showing today because it's been made public and it's discussed at the workshops and so on. So I apologize if we're repeating ourselves too much. Thank you. Okay. technologically challenged. Okay, so do you want to go forward? Please.
Sorry, we're just getting it in the full screen. One moment.
So you're going to see 3 housing types. We looked at a lot more. We needed some robust ones to use as precedent to work out these urban designs, but there are obviously other ones. These different housing types that you'll see are also related to assumptions about how parking would be handled. While there's no parking required, all the schemes are trying to show as much parking as possible. One thing you'll notice is that we didn't, well, we considered things that would have resulted in changing zoning, existing zoning. We didn't do any schemes that required zoning changes. So the land use bylaw as it stands pertains to everything you're going to see. Another thing that's important to say is that as architects, we're concerned about the building code implications of these things, so that we're not showing you schemes that don't work with National Building Code in terms of egress and safety and all of that. You can just assume that that stuff is being considered. Okay, so we kept the existing distinction between low, medium, and high density parts of the site, existing zoning. Just waiting for the types to come up here. I'm not very good at singing and dancing, so hopefully get the technology going here. Okay. Okay, so there is not a lot of the site that's owned for single family. There's 3 little lots that Miranda pointed out. But in thinking about that, we've thought a lot about affordable housing. We have a lot of experience with small homes, tiny homes, and so these are some precedents really from our own work around North America. Next one. So a single family house, 1 unit per lot, plus an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, which is allowed in all lots in Lunenburg. And we're always looking at the cars, trying to see how the cars can be handled. When you have low density, it's easy to have parking on the site, on-grade parking on the site, and of course on the street. So next one, please. So the middle density is there's some semi-detached housing in Halifax. That's a kind of a well-known model, a kind of Georgian townhouse model, row house model. Next one, please. So we've looked at these in terms of semi-detached and also stacked attached, and see what that does to the density. So here you see the first slide, if you go back one, just shows 2 houses side by side, larger houses. Those would be at least 3 bedroom houses. The next one shows stacked attached. In other words, and we've shown that they can be done differently. The one on the left has a 2-story unit on top. The one below is a 2-story unit below. The one on the right is a 1-story flat on the bottom and a 3-story unit above. And again, we ghost in the ADU or accessible the additional dwelling unit, which has to be 600 square feet or less in Lunenburg. Still parking on the street and in the side yard because we're working with the existing zoning. The zoning requires the lots to be pretty big, so there's room to park on the lot. And you'd get 8 of these on a typical Lunenburg block. On the right side, you see a block shown there. That's your historic block in Lunenburg, and you would have 8. Now in a downtown lot, just for reference, you get 14. So the lots in this part of the town have to be a lot bigger. Okay, so you see that when you do this, you can get 32 dwelling units in the same form and 8 accessory dwelling units for a maximum of 40 units per block. So that's just a kind of way to budget, how to work with a block, a typical block. Next one, of course, is row housing, and you see it all over the world. See it in Brooklyn, you see it in Lunenburg, you see it in Halifax, you see it all over. And that's how you can get more affordable, higher densities. Now, all of the zoning requires a maximum of 40% site coverage, so you can't build more of the site than 40% of the lot. So you can see here, to get 40% lot coverage, you break the rows up, and here we can see you can get 44 units on a same typical block, so more affordable, more density. And you'll see in the schemes we show later that the higher density in the schemes is always down the hill, not at the top of the hill, not near the top of the hill. Next one, please. And you can see you can do the same thing. The form comes first, and then how you subdivide it, how many units you get. Smaller the units, the more the units, like this one, the more affordable the units are. And Miranda talked about how we developed an idea about the mix of types of units in terms of size based on the housing needs study that was done. Now, when you do row housing, there's no place to park easily on the site. You're showing parking on the street, or you're going to have a garage door on the street where you go in. I think you can see a car ghosted in there. So those are two options that come with town housing. Okay. And you get up to 66, I think it was, per block. Now, so those are the kind of ingredients, the building blocks that we used. As I said, we could have used other ones, but these are pretty universal. A townhouse is a townhouse is a townhouse, no matter where you are in the world. So we're picking robust, not tricky things, but standard, well understood things. So the 4 schemes that you already probably know about are these. So the first one, from the densest to the least dense. So starting with a town square and precedence, if you can go forward. So I think everybody has a good feeling what this is. I mean, you see it all over the world. Sorry. Did I do something? Okay, so they're usually formed by town housing all around them. Now, the middle one, of course, is relevant because Lunenburg is on a hill, is a drumlin. So the San Francisco one there is pretty relevant. So next one, please. So we do a build. So we'll show you first the boundary, then the distinction between the medium density and high density zones. Then we had the streets, which were pretty tricky, but work. They work. But a lot of the streets in Lunenburg now wouldn't work. You couldn't have them. And a lot of the streets in Lunenburg never really became streets and are green because they were too steep even for the horses and buggies. So this is a lot. These streets are more workable than a lot of the streets in the existing historic town. Next one. So the green streets that allow you to get up and down the hill as a pedestrian and break up the blocks. And you can see the percentages of the site. Now, this is the net site. You know that the trail and Sylvia Park are not part of the site, so those green spaces are not in these numbers. Add the backyards. The densest scheme is 86% not houses. Next. So, and it's based on, each one has a mix. So you have the 3 little single family houses right here. Next one. Then semi-detached, middle density near the top of the hill. Next. higher density town housing, row housing, at the bottom of the hill. Next. So the housing ends up at 14% and the non-house housing part of the site is 86%. And that's the densest scheme. That's the high density one. So you can see the attempt even in this one to keep the buffer at the top of the hill, where the trailer park is, where the Sylvia Park is, of course, and where Oak Harbor happens and where the Blockhouse is kept open, and of course, respecting the trail at the bottom and the service easements between it and the row housing. So now, depending on how you stack units within these, there's a range of density, and you'll see that later. So we, in all three of the schemes that involve housing, we picked a middle density number of units. So you can see this one with the kind of mix that's shown here of unit types, from small ones to big ones. It easily makes 368 units. Okay, so here's some pictures, some modeling. Now this is, you know, looks a bit repetitive like a monopoly board because we're in urban design. This is not architecture. We're architects, but this isn't architecture yet. Architecture comes later. But the architecture, if anything happens later, will be guided by covenants that would make sure that good things happen. So from the back harbor, from the trail, next. Next one. And then from the ground level. So this perspective is taken from Sylvia Park, looking out over the back harbor, and also on the left, looking down one of those green streets. So you see that there's a green way going toward the water here on the left. These are diagrammatic buildings. Sure, they got chimneys and windows and things, but you know, shingles, wood construction. Okay, so number two, we called out of sight, based on this idea that you see less and less from the hilltop because the development, any development would be farther down the hill. Next one. So same build. Streets this time. The streets go through south to Soffit. Next one. Always the same elements, the green streets going up and down the hill for connectivity. Next one. Backyards, light green. Total open space in this one is 91%. So that means, next, that the buildings, part of the site that's buildings is only 9% in option 2. The unit count includes the accessory dwelling units. Now that's, you get about 250 there. So you get a medium dent, you get a lot of green at the top of the hill, a narrower band of a street of middle density and a higher density bottom of the hill. So again, the 3D massing only, of course. So these are all based on also, you know, we've seen a lot in Nova Scotia of disasters in the last year or so, fire and flooding and so on. And you got to have two ways to get out of any place in this development, just like you do out of an apartment building. So the cul-de-sacs and everything have been studied in terms of maximum length, dead ends and so on for safety. So this is that middle of the site view of a street, same thing with a greenway on the left, but also you can see these are duplexes, both sides of the street. And as Miranda pointed out earlier, on the uphill side of the street, just like in old Lunenburg, the buildings are a story taller on the uphill side of the street as a rule than they are on the downhill side of the street, which creates that hill town effect where everybody can look over everyone else to see the view. Next one. The third one is we're calling Commons Crescent, maximizing the commons at the top of the hill. And I know it's not the royal crescented path, but it'd be pretty swell to live in a crescent of housing at the bottom of the hill. So same build. First, one street. Now to make it efficient, building both sides of the street, 'cause streets are expensive. May as well get the density when you make a street. So you can see most of the hill is now green. Truly green. Next one. So in this case, 94% of the site is not building. Only 6% is building. And it's way down over the hill. So 170 units still, which is more than the 120 units that the provincial housing study said should be achieved in the next 2 or 3 years in Lunenburg. So even this one would meet that study. And you can see most of the site is untouched by this. Trees are a little bigger in these drawings. They're going to get bigger. And when we go on street level, you'll see that there's an idea about garage doors, garages that can happen at street level, because when you have townhousing, you probably need to have some indoor parking as well as on-street parking, and not much room for at-grade parking next to the building. Now, we said we would always carry an option that didn't include any housing. And, you know, again, go big or stay home, you know, it's not Central Park, I know, but I will say again, like I said at an earlier workshop, that, you know, our discipline is urban design. So as independent professionals, we have to believe that we only draw good urban design schemes. The 4 different densities, but all of these would be good urban design. They have precedent all over the world, places that we all love to go and visit. So we're not doing that developer thing where you show good, nice schemes and bad schemes. They're all good schemes. I think this is a good scheme too. So this is the one without any housing. We didn't do any estimating on the cost of it. Everything costs something, but that hasn't been done. Now, Miranda, would you like to do the summary and take it over? Thank you.
Okay, so the summary chart at the end here, I apologize if the numbers are a little small. I need to look at them as well. Okay, so at the top, you see the 4 different options. Down the side, we have the % open space that Brian just went through. So it describes the total open space without housing, and then the footprints of housing. Those are the differences in percentages. So the open space, when we describe it, it does include roads, sidewalks, the green streets, the parks, and backyards. That's what's included in that % number. So you can see option 1, we have 86% versus 14% of housing, 91 versus 9%, 94 versus 6%, and 100 versus 0. That's what we see across the top. We've been talking all along about these unit count ranges, and I know at workshop 3, we went through that quite a bit. We didn't have really kind of a basis for how many units of each type we might break down to. We, of course, have used the housing needs report then to actually get a unit cost. So we needed to have a number to then give it a population to provide some costing. So we thought it was still important to include the range. You can see there's a low for option 1 of 239 up to a high of 507 units. For option 2, we're at 163 up to a high density of 377. And then option 3, we're at 102 to approximately 294 units. And option 4, of course, no housing shown, so 0 units. So the actual, which is the number that we used for this report, is in the middle of those ranges. And if you look, there was a table included in the report that kind of showed the breakdown of the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. We did take the ADUs out of that number as a separate unit type on its own. So it does elevate the number of 1 bedroom / studio units. So that's the next row down, which for option 1 right now in the study is 368 units. Option 2 is 256 units. 3 is 170 units. So pretty much in the middle, which is what you want to see. You want to see a mix of these type of units in the development, not all 1 bedroom or smaller units, and not all single 3 or plus bedroom units. Down to the next row. So there was many ways that we could break down, of course, the costing that Raymond from Hanscom had provided. At the very bottom of the spreadsheet, you're going to see that total number that was highlighted in the report as well. And the 2 lines above, we broke it down in 2 different ways. So a construction cost per unit is the first one, but it's only referring to the building cost. That's excluding any of the site services, so any of the streets or upgrades required. That's just to isolate the cost of the building itself. So for the first one, we're at 247,000 per unit, roughly 200. And this is a blended rate too. I know someone asked earlier about the range, and there is a range per unit type. This is a blended rate across all of the units. For option 2, 248,000 per unit, and option 3, 247,000. So you can see they're pretty close across option 1, 2, and 3. And that would be different. The difference is mainly because we have a different number of townhouses, semi-detached, and the single family homes are the same pretty much across there. But as you start to add in the site services and streets, which is the next line, so the construction cost per unit includes buildings, streets, and services. So now each unit is taking on that additional cost. You'll see a little bit of a difference across to option 1, 2, and 3 because they're carrying the cost of the upgrades. So again, this is excluding contingencies, which is written in brackets at the bottom. So for option 1, we're looking at 328,000 per unit. Option 2, 342,000 per unit, and option 3, 348,000 per unit. So they're gradually going up as the density goes down, just slightly. You can see the difference there. And at the very bottom here, this is the total construction estimate, which does include contingencies. So for option 1, we have 183.3 million, option 2, 133 million, and option 3, 90 million. And option 4, we did not have costing for at this point. So that's a very quick summary at the end to compare kind of the 4 options that we presented. And I just wanted to leave it with this slide because I know we did go through a lot of different builds for the 4 options. We don't rarely see them all side by side, but on the screen here, you have option 1 in the top left corner, option 2 in the top right corner, and in the bottom left, we have option 3 and option 4 in the bottom right. So I'll just leave it on this slide, and thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. So at this time, council has some possible recommendations in front of them that they can move ahead with, or there's some alternatives below. So I'll open it to council at this time. Councillor Moser.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question in terms of like the first motion is to move forward like with option 2. And when I look at option 2, there's not a lot of difference between option 2 and option 1 other than the amount of units that we have there. And the thing I really like about option one is the way the streets run off of Creighton, Fox, or Creighton and York and Lawrence. It just makes a lot of sense in terms of the flow. So, could we move, if we decide to go through with option two, could we still have a streetscape plan of option one? And then in the future, that could be developed later on if that would be the course of action that people would decide to go on.
Through the chair, I will hand it back over to the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple team in just a moment. But just to address your question, again, I do think that all of these options have positives and negatives. And so we welcome your feedback. If the town were interested in, for example, seeing the full streetscape of option one built, but only the housing added to it from option two, that would be a question for the phasing of the project. However, depending on how that phasing were to unfold, building more streets, of course, means an increase in cost, which would then change the amount of money that a developer may have to invest in the site to reap the number of units. So it is certainly something that can be considered. And I don't believe that it's beyond the design team's capability to create and move forward with development, some form of draft development agreement based on that approach. However, just keep in mind that the costing would change.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. I don't have a lot to add to that. I should have mentioned during the presentation that all of these are shown in terms of a full build scheme. Of course, all of them would have a phasing strategy applied to it, like you had mentioned. So it is possible, like option one, to just start by building the bottom of the hill and kind of make your way up. That would apply to any of them. Even option three, a section of it could be built, and then eventually all of it. But in terms of pricing, we price them all as if they're fully built in today's dollar to be able to compare the four options.
Can you, yeah, exactly. And that was my thought, that this is a mega project. So maybe someone wants to take this off in chunks, but if it's designed that it can be the full, maybe we design it, maybe we should, I would be more happy moving forward, drafting the development rules based on the full plan, knowing that maybe Lawrence Street and York Street wouldn't even be built, in the first phase of the plan. And the other nice thing about option one, it does give you a more diverse, there's more options there for more people, so I mean, you'll have a more diverse neighborhood with, the options that you have available to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Halverson?
I'm not entirely sure who to direct this to, but when we're talking about this phase development and selling, this is a mega project. Is the intent to sell to one developer who perhaps would then hire contractors, build specific parts? Or are we looking at a phased approach, selling parcels to different developers who would then need to follow the prescribed development plan?
Through the chair, excellent question. As I mentioned in my speaking notes, of course, one of the abilities that the town has in exploring residential development on land that it owns is that council can then control how the development unfolds. So whether to subdivide the land, sell parts of it at a time, whether to seek a developer for a full build, these are options that ultimately rest with council. But again, we feel confident that a development agreement and that these designs can be broken down into phases. So if council were interested in, for example, selling a smaller part of the land to be developed first, retaining some, that may be an option. I don't have the expertise or a crystal ball for that matter, to foresee how that might affect the potential build out or sale, but certainly all those options remain open to you.
Through the chair, Lunenburg had a plan and clear covenants when it was first designed 250 years ago. But a lot of variety happened. And it's a general principle, I think, that if you have more parcels and more developers or different kinds of developers, co-ops and small builders and larger developers, you're going to get more diversity. And if you look at Lunenburg, it's incredibly architecturally diverse. So maybe more parcels is better.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Halverson?
I'll go mic here if someone else has questions, but again, through the chair back to Hillary, you did mention in your presentation that we're looking at any of these infrastructure needs costs would be handed on to whichever developer or group of developers would be responsible for developing this project. Does that include, I saw in the report, the wastewater treatment plant may not have the capacity that we had anticipated to provide for this development. Would we put the developer on the hook for that kind of infrastructure as well, for lift stations, those kind of other ancillary supports?
Through the chair, the costing estimates that have been prepared do include all of the costs for any plant upgrades that would be required to support the population estimates on this site. And all the calculations have been done so that every cost associated with this development would be borne by the developer. Whether that is a realistic prospect is something that really only the market can determine.
Thank you. Any other questions around the table? This side of the room? Any questions? Any more comments? Okay, I have a few, if I may. Basically, I really enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed the report we received last week. I'd like to see personally some more detailed numbers come back before we make a move forward at this time. And what I mean by numbers, and this wouldn't be probably for BML, but it would be more for staff to come back with tax implications. How it would affect the residents of the community if we go ahead with either, I guess, 1, 2, or 3, how it would affect the community if we didn't go through with any of it, went with 4, for example, some kind of a base idea on how it would impact the rate. Because, bottom line, that's one of the big selling points of this project is an increased tax rate. So I think most of the residents would like to see what kind of impact that might have on their overall tax bill in the future if we were to proceed with any one of the 4 items. Obviously, if we don't do any, if we do item 4, we maybe projecting out some of the capital we have to do in the next 5 to 10 years. What would that mean on your tax bill compared to an increased tax base? But until we, hear some of those numbers and some of that information, personally, I'm not prepared to move forward on the recommendations as it's presented in the draft motions. And I did talk to the CAO, Jamie Doyle, today, and if we would send it back to staff for those types of numbers, we're probably looking at an April date at best. If things go really well, might be late April, early May. But, obviously, we're not telling staff to go back and bring these numbers back next council meeting, right? Because I think if we're going to move forward on this and we're going to do something here, I think we want to have all the answers and we want to do it right. And in the meantime, by delaying it another couple of months, it also gives an opportunity, not saying it's going to happen because we haven't had much success yet, but who knows, maybe Parks Canada or UNESCO might write back and say, go ahead and do this or don't do it, but we might have a response from them. So that's my feeling at this time. So just pass that along. Councillor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. I don't disagree with your comments. I think that's important information. I do have one question first. With regards to the first motion with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple architects moving forward with the rules, is that still in conjunction with the RFP that we originally set out?
Through the chair, yes, it is.
So that won't initiate any further cost for us, but it will also have more of the information that maybe even help support questions that the mayor is asking to do. And actually with more information, we make better decisions. So I would, certainly support, moving that forward along with the request that the mayor has made as well. The only thing I would say is that I would base it on the option 1 street design, just so that we could have the full view of that ever. I would move that motion forward if that's acceptable to council.
Are you adding the part about the extra information to the motion or that I had requested, or?
Unless we wanted that under a separate motion, that way we don't get it snarled up with the RFP that we're dealing with the architects.
I'm fine with that. We'll do this motion and we can bring up mine. I can't make a motion, but okay.
Okay, so I'll move that council direct staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited on drafting development rules based on design option 1 street design.
So it's moved, a little diversion from the recommendation, the design option 1, not option 2 or 3. So is there a second on option 1? So it's seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any more discussion on the motion at this time? Councillor Halverson.
Just concerned about design 2 was the staff recommendation. And I'm just wondering if we do go ahead with the recommendations on number 1, what does that do for if we want to potentially go with recommendation number 2 instead? Will we still get costing for that? Or do we have to go back again if we decide we want to go a different direction with either 2 or 3?
Through the chair, certainly, while there is still some leniency under the current contract to continue working on all of the options, design guidelines is largely restricted to 1 option. However, if we do divide the work such that option 1 is council's choice for those design guidelines, we are more likely to be able to edit those guidelines in-house to scale them back should we decide to go for another option. Also, any development agreement or covenant that may be put in place could be put in place on only the land that we plan to develop. So hence, any part of the design that we don't move forward with would de facto not be attached to that parcel.
Any other questions? I guess I have one. So under this motion, in the design and the development rules, we're going to come back with covenants for us at that time. Like, what they might be, I don't know. But, for myself personally, no short-term rentals, no seasonal housing. If we're going to do this, we're doing it for the reasons we've all stated. We're doing it for increased housing, long-term rentals in the town of Lunenburg. So can that be put in covenants when they come back?
Your worship, certainly those have been the guiding principles for the project, and that is the direction that we'll continue to work with the McKay Lyons Sweet Apple team on. Those development agreements and covenants would come back before council for comment. And again, before they were adopted, a public hearing would be required.
Thank you. And I guess one other thing that I didn't even realize was happening outside of the city of Halifax, but can we put covenants on that a developer couldn't come in, bid on the project, get all the covenants in place, and then try to sell the development before they've started anything at a higher price? Because that's what's happening in HRM, and it's starting to happen just down the road from us. And what it's doing is it's basically slowing down development. So it defeats the purpose of what people were getting excited about, and actually hurts the cause. So there's developments right now in neighboring communities that are on hold because the developer bought it, got all the plans in place, and is now trying to make money off those plans. So can we put that covenants in?
Your worship, these are all excellent questions, and this is exactly why we included this piece of work in the RFP, so that we can look at all of these questions holistically with the consultant who came up with the design and seek further legal opinion as needed.
Thank you. So is there any other questions? Councillor Sanford.
Just further to Councillor Mosier's point, I just looking for a little bit of clarification from staff. If I understand correctly, the intent on focusing on option 1 is to explore it in the context of phased approach, to the different sections. So I guess my question is, can it be divided into 4 phases? I'm thinking, or, you know, staff would know how best, or McKay Lyons would know how best to phase it. But recognizing that the intention is to potentially look at developing phases gradually over time.
Through the chair, that is correct. And this idea of phasing is something that staff has discussed with Brian McKay Lyons on a very high preliminary level. We wanted to make sure that that was a possibility coming into this meeting. And that is the type of discussion that would be included in the next phase of the design work.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Halverson?
Just quickly, I notice when we're looking at number 1 versus number 2, the number 2 design, it has obviously that extension onto saw pit, whereas the number 1 rounds through Blockhouse. If we're going to go with number 1, obviously that's not in consideration. Is that a problem? Is there anything on that back stretch that's going to cause us concern? And if we're not accounting for it when we're using number 1 as our model?
Sorry.
I'm definitely not answering the question, right?
No, I apologize. We have other consultants online as well. And Andrew, I'm not sure if you still have your mic available, if you want to jump in as well. I will say we did intentionally do the street layouts different between option 1 and 2 to compare 1 housing on the street services as well. So that is a big difference between option 1 and 2. Option 1 doesn't carry the cost of moving the power lines that option 2 does. Option 2, when we're moving that road to connect to Saw Pit Road, there is 1 power line that does need to be relocated. I believe in the cost estimate, there's an allowance of $500,000 for that. Option 1, we have a steeper street that goes up the hill to connect to Blockhouse Hill, but it was a decision, again, different layout. We wanted to show kind of 4 distinctly different development options, and that was another way to do that. So I will, like you're saying, they could be combined. Sorry.
They can be combined.
Could be, there is the option, of course, of a hybrid version of that as well, between 1 and 2. Andrew, I'm not sure if anything you want to add on to what I just said there regarding the services or street layout.
I was just going to say the same thing that I think Brian just said, is you could do a version that combines 1 and 2, where option 1 goes out to Saw Pit and not up to Blockhouse Hill. But really nothing more to add than that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Halverson?
I'm not sure if this is in order or not, but I would like to modify that in motion to make that change, because I want to make sure we have a full picture of what our potential costs are going to be.
So you want to amend the original motion to include the possibility of the road going, like either road?
I guess I would look to consultants here to try and figure that out, but yes, option 1 with the extension to Saw Pit Road, so that we account for the utility pole needing to be moved.
Okay, so do we make an amendment to Jamie?
Through the chair to the mayor, what I would request is a quick 5-minute recess so we capture this motion accurately, so that we're all clear what we're voting on as we move forward.
Yeah, we're just gonna have a quick recess to put the motion to paper.
Before we walk away, anything else anyone is concerned?
Everybody good? Okay, no, we're just gonna get a quick recess to get this in writing so we can read it out properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
gonna get this thing rolling again. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And we're gonna start by, I'm gonna turn the meeting over to Councillor Mosher.
Thank you, Worship. So in order to maybe mitigate a lot of motions, I will just withdraw my previous motion, if that's agreeable to council.
Is that agreeable by everybody? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to try to read Jamie's writing for the next motion. Okay, so that council direct staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architect Limited on drafting development rules based on design option number 1, Town Square with possible road connection of Creighton Street and Saw Pit Road. It's moved. So I need someone from the floor to move it. It's moved by Councillor Mosher, seconded by Councillor Halverson. Okay, any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Now we have 2 more motions in front of us. Councillor Sanford, you said you wanted to speak on those? Good.
I would like to move that we defer the motion that council declare the land identified in attachment A surplus and no longer required for town purposes. I would like to defer that to the spring.
Okay, I don't need a motion, I guess, because we're not doing any action items. So is everybody agreed to move that to spring? Go ahead.
Before we vote on that, just curious as to why we felt it was necessary, why staff felt it was necessary to include it in the agenda tonight. Is there an urgency, or is there some process that will be held up if we don't declare surplus, as Hilary has mentioned, that it doesn't actually action anything at this point? It doesn't say we're selling anything, but I just want to, if we defer, and I'm not against that, but if we do defer, what does that mean? Is there a reason why why it was asked to declare tonight?
Through the chair. Again, this is sort of the natural next step in the design process, as declaring the land surplus is the trigger for the public information meeting. That would again open this issue up to public debate in a format very similar to a public hearing. This is a motion that can be moved at a future time when council feels that a public information meeting, we're at a stage in the process where a public information meeting would be appropriate.
Thank you. So I just want to comment on Councillor Sanford. I agree with her initial thoughts. I think that we're a little ways away from engaging in a public discussion at this point. So that's why I think her recommendation was appropriate. So I'd be supporting her recommendation. Councillor Halverson.
So I just wanted to follow up on a comment you made earlier about getting that costing. I don't know, have we captured that somewhere already? But I would want to make sure that before we have this session, whatever date we're deferring to, that we will have all that information, all that financial information in our hands.
That has to be a separate motion that will be made after we deal with these 3. We'll add it to the bottom, and I can't make the motion, but hopefully here someone will. Okay, thank you. So, new information, we actually should make a motion to defer this to a future meeting. So, Councillor Sanford made it a motion. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Halverson. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Mosher.
Thank you, Worship. Well, if I hear correctly tonight, I think the public does want to weigh in on the sale of the Blockhouse Hill. So, I would sooner have that discussion sooner than later, although I would like to have the information available to us to do that. So, if we were to, and one more, do we have to declare the land as surplus before it initiates the public consultation, or can we have the public consultation? Because if just saying that we're going to declare it as surplus, that stirs up a lot of, anxiety. Well, I would just as soon have the public information session, and then we can declare it if so wished that way. So that's my question.
Through the chair. Under the land divestiture policy, one would declare the land surplus and no longer required from town purposes. That's the language taken directly from the policy before having a public information meeting. Whether a public information meeting could be held prior to declaring the land surplus would not align with that policy. Whether that option is open would be a question for other members of staff.
If I may, through the CAO, then could we look into seeing if that's possible? Because we'd always bring that question back at a very early meeting if we could get a question back from legal, if that was possible or not.
Through the chair to council, I think what's being requested, information alone, whether it, talking about the street connection and tax implications, I think that would take some time anyway. So I think deferring to the spring, I don't think it hinders the process by any means. It allows us time to find information. But Hillary's very right. There is a process already outlined about declaring land surplus. And in fact, it's part of even that process. You can't sell it without doing it. I think you're right, Councillor Mosher, that declaring surplus does raise the eyebrows of a lot of folks. I don't disagree with Councillor Sanford, but it's really a council decision whether you want to wait and get all the information together at once, then go through those other motions in the spring. The spring isn't that far away, to be quite honest. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, all to that way. I think we're all on the same page. We'd like to get this in front of the public as soon as possible, but with all the facts. So by saying the spring, is that general enough that, if staff could be prepared in 4 to 6 weeks, as opposed to say 8 to 10, we can go sooner. It doesn't have to be turn of the calendar.
Right now, with the workload and other projects in place, we were discussing this today. We're probably looking at the April the 9th meeting if everything goes well. So we're probably looking sometime in April at best, right? So that's if we don't run into any snags or any distractions between now and April. So I think that was the recommendation that was given to me. So that's why I said spring, right? I mean, we can't overload it and we don't want to rush it. So we want the numbers and the facts to be accurate and be real numbers. So.
Through the chair, if I may, there's nothing that precludes staff from bringing forward an information report from staff recommendation if there's an update. I'd hate to put a date on bringing information back, because then if something changes, we have to come back and change the date. It's very formal that way. Spring is open enough that allows us the wiggle room of a season to get in and get all the information. So I think if something does happen where there's a snag and we're going to be delayed, staff brings forward an information report to give you an update. There's no need for a motion for that, just a regular course of business for staff and council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moser.
Thanks, Your Worship. So maybe what we could do is defer, like instead of just deferring it, we'll put a date on it that we'll bring it back to council, say like the end of last council meeting in February, to make the motion to declare it a surplus. And then at that time, we can make another motion, because we'll be a little further down the road. Our time frame will be a little more accurate, to say we could hold our public meeting in May at some time like that, if that sounds reasonable. Is that okay?
CAO Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to percolate in my head what's coming through the council agendas, because I don't want to overpack them. As I mentioned earlier, put a date on it would be kind of hard. It could really box staff in to get something there. I'd rather an open-ended spring, but that's completely up to council. I'm looking to the leadership team here. I can't think off the top of my head coming through from an agenda perspective in February how packed we are. I think we're getting pretty heavy right now. So if you leave that spring, we can certainly make it work. If you put February, then we'll strive to make it work. But if we can't, we'll have to come back with an information report asking for an amendment.
Yeah, I was only saying that we bring the motion to declare the surplus back towards the end of February. Then the information, for the public meeting, we could, hopefully maybe by then we might have a better idea on a time frame that we could, a meeting might be in May, June, July. You might be able to do that for us.
Through the chair to the councillor. Okay, I understand now. I think it's a bit less daunting to do it that way. I think we could certainly bring it back and have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. My only concern with that is, and I'll just, I mean, I guess I wouldn't probably be supporting it going to surplus until I had the numbers and that I had requested earlier. So that would make a difference on how I voted, quite honestly. So at this time, I wouldn't have enough information in front of me. And I think staff is saying they wouldn't have that information at the end of February. So that's probably looking at springs. That's why I thought spring would work personally.
Just one final question. How long of a notice do we have to give for a public consultation meeting?
Through the chair to council, I believe it's 14 days. But to go back to the original question, just so I'm clear, the information that we're looking for when we bring forward this surplus motion, that would only include the tax implication, correct? And not the actual engineering design of the road and the electrical utility? If so, I think that's certainly doable. And just got secret message from the clerk that February 27th agenda is fairly light, so we probably could make that work.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor that is to defer this motion until spring. So February 27th isn't in the spring, so we're gonna have to, we're gonna have to amend that motion or take it off the table and do a new motion or vote on the original motion first.
I'll take that motion off the table.
Okay, so now we have no motion on the table, so we're still back to the draft motion in front of us. How would council like to proceed? Councillor Moser.
Well, I'll move that we defer declaring the land a surplus until the February, what meeting, 27th meeting? At least that gets us that. We can defer it again at that point in time if we still don't have our, our information, but at least that'll keeps it on the agenda.
That's fine. I'll just give you a quick update and you can, I mean, we can do it without me, but I won't be here February 27th. So I'm away that 4 or 5 days.
I'll make it a different date if you like it later. Yeah. What's
In the spring sometime?
well, obviously, in the context of spring, what's the meeting after the 20th of March? We would officially be in spring. Susan's original motion could count. 26. Okay, the meeting of March 26th. How's that?
It's been moved for March 26th. Is there a seconder? It's been seconded by just about everybody. Councillor Halverson was up first, I think.
Yes.
Yes. So the motion is to defer the draft motion in front of us to declare the land surplus to a meeting on March the 26th, when we hope to have more information in front of us. That's been moved and it's been seconded. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, okay. And then last one, I think that's there. We'll obviously have to defer until we do the next phase. So do we even have to make a motion for that, to defer that? We probably do. But we're not allowed to do it because of the motion on ahead of it. So, okay, so. Will it work?
Yeah, it's just there.
Okay, you guys are good moving that because we have to move it until we have the other information. Okay, so that one's moved ahead. So now we need a motion to ask for the information that I brought up earlier, and I can't make that motion. So moved by.
You can read it out that way you like it, but I'll make it for you.
I was asking staff to come back to us with all the tax implications on the proposals, and right now we're looking at number 1. So, i.e., what the tax base would be, what the tax rate could be with development, without development, and so on. So, all the financial implications that it would mean to the residents at that time before we go any further in the discussion. That's, I guess, sort of my motion. Yeah.
So you and I were thinking along the same lines, but I think, and I think Hillary may have answered some of this. I'm concerned that if we do this in a phased approach, again, if we decide this is what we're going to do and we want to do this in a phased approach, trying to have put all this cost that we're talking about for infrastructure onto, whichever developer decides they want to take this on. If it's a single developer and it's front loaded, okay, well, that's one thing. That's, we could probably deal with the infrastructure at that point. But if we're talking about a phased approach and we're talking about something that's going to happen over 10, 15 years and maybe over 5 or 6 different developers, which of those is going to pick up the tab for expanding the wastewater? Which one's going to pick up the tab for lift stations? Which one's going to pick up the tab for electric? Which one's going to, these are the issues we get into, right? And I'm concerned that when we start talking about some of the tax implications, we need to know what the load is going to be, in those 5-year intervals as that development goes on. Because if we're spending money to increase infrastructure, but we don't have the increased tax base yet, where's that money coming from? Right. So I'm not sure how we would capture that. I guess I would look to Lisa. I know this is not a fair question. I apologize. You've said many times your crystal ball is broken. But what can we do? Is there some mechanisms, or is there some scale, anything that we could look at where we could have some better clarity of what we would be looking at?
Through the chair, your worship. Certainly we can take it back as staff and give some consideration to what that might look like with phasing. I mean, it may not be obviously perfect, that may not be how it rolls out, but we could at least perhaps design something in there for your review in the report.
Yeah, I guess at this point, would staff have an idea of if we were going to proceed with whatever first phase, what a first phase would look like? And perhaps I would look to our consultants for a thought on this too. Perhaps that's a discussion you guys could have. What would be a realistic starting point, realistic number of units, what infrastructure will need to support those units over that first few years, and what we're going to be responsible for as the town, what we could expect someone to come up with as from the developer side of things. Again, we have to keep that balance between the money, this extra revenue we're anticipating coming in, and then money that's going to be going out to support the infrastructure. And it's going to be a heavy load to start, and we're going to see at the back end, but we got to get there first.
Okay, well, I'm going to hand the floor over to CEO Jamie here in a second, but first I will like to just reiterate every example that's in this report right now. It shouldn't top load us at all because all the expenses are at the cost of the developer. So I don't know how it's going to cost the taxpayers, exorbitant amount of money at that point, because it's all at development cost. So I think we have to make that very clear and I think at this point, depending on how we do this, and I know the last time I looked at it 20 years ago, that's basically the way the MGA states that it has to be at the developer's cost. The land has to be sold at some type of an appraised market value unless we go through some kind of co-op. Like there's options out there, but there's not a lot of options for municipal government just to do this. We can't just give developers, a for-profit developer, the land and put the services in and say have at her. I don't think we're allowed to do that. So that's just one thing. So the residents don't get scared at this. Like I thought I had one extra zero when I was looking at the numbers originally, right? So that's not our cost, that's the developer's cost, right? So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Councillor Howison, I can certainly appreciate the level of caution you're bringing to the question. I think we're digging really deep into something that we don't fully understand yet. I think for us to bring back the full design load and I guess an estimated tax revenue as a result of that development, I think we could certainly do that until we better understand the who, what, where, and when of the buyer, whether it's a one large developer or if there's a request to chop it up. Typically, you could also see one large developer buy it in its full form and then site manage themselves. I think for us to get into the options of what each of those phases could look like and try to generate potential tax, I think it'd be like just spinning a lock. Like we wouldn't be able to really generate that. I think just one number based on each development maxed out as it is, I think we could certainly do that. As we move forward through this process, as I mentioned in a previous item, there's nothing precluding staff to bring forward information updates to council on this development. So let's say we get through this, we declare the land, we start to see that people aren't willing to buy the full load, then we can bring stuff back and have a conversation with you. There's nothing handcuffing council to that. It's just a matter of, let's bring back responsible numbers that we can ballpark as a rather than stargazing and trying to figure it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson.
All right, so just so I understand, so we're going to go ahead on, we'll make some assumptions, which is fine because this is what we no one has a crystal ball, as we talked about. We'll make the assumptions that we're going to go ahead with one developer, and then we'll have those numbers based off of that. We'll adjust accordingly as need be if, you know, that situation changes, as this process evolves. Is that what we're talking about now then?
Through Chair to Councillor Halverson, I agree, but I think where we all get lost is talking about developer rather than to say we bring forward the design and the unit counts associated with those. Then we start to put numbers onto that, not necessarily the person or the group. So if we stick to the land, stick to the units, I think we'll be okay. But to try to chop it up and figure out what could possibly happen, we would be there all day.
So there's now a motion that I have here that I can read off if you'd like. If someone would like to read it off, I guess, for me, since I can't make a motion, but here, I'll give it to Councillor Moser.
All right. I cannot read your writing. That council directs staff to bring back all tax implications associated with the development options presented by McKay Lyons at the January 23rd, 2024 meeting. Today.
Okay, so it's been moved by Councillor Duggan. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sanford. Okay, any further discussion on the motion in front of us? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Okay. So we're through section 10. So now section 11 is notice of motions, information requests, councillor reports. This is where if you want to, any councillors, Councillor Halverson.
I've got a couple things. First, just wanted to follow up with you, Mayor, about we're following up on the there was going to be some contact with Indigenous leaders about the renaming of Cornwall Street to Queen. I'd just like an update of where we are with that.
I've sent an email again to two of the elders recently as a week ago. I understand one of them has some health issues right now, so I'm just waiting to hear back. So as soon as I hear back, I'll let you all know where we are on that. But I've had some really good, open and really actually nice discussions with them just before the holidays. And as we all know, the holidays sort of defer everything. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that update. Sorry, I had one more, if I could. Yeah.
Hey, Councillor Halverson.
Yeah, again, thank you. I appreciate that update. It's I'm just glad to hear that's going along and that the lines of communication are open. Secondly, I wanted to make a notice of motion to develop a policy to remove a councillor from a position appointed by council, including deputy mayor or a committee appointment. I'd be looking for a staff report to provide examples from other jurisdictions. And that report should include the criteria for removal, the due process for that councillor when they've committed an infraction, and finally to spell out a procedure for the removal.
You want to notice a motion for staff to come back with an actual motion to proceed at the next meeting or one of the next meetings, upcoming meeting?
I'd like to, I guess I'd look to staff to see what makes sense on that. I mean, we can make the motion to develop the policy and put the criteria in place at the time of the motion is made, or I can just ask for a staff report and we can go on to crafting the motion once the staff report is in hand.
The way I see it, we have two choices. We can make a notice of motion for staff to bring back a report at the next or one of the upcoming meetings, or we can make a motion to waive our notice of motion policy like we did 2 weeks ago, and then you can make a motion tonight if you'd like to get staff to come back with it. But that's really our two options.
I'm not really interested in waiving the notice of motion. I'd like to give the staff time to get this done. I think we need some consideration on this motion. So I guess maybe through the CAO, if you have some advice.
Through the chair to the Councillor Halverson, if I'm hearing you correctly, you want us to bring forward a policy or policy amendment or a report that outlines how a councillor, deputy mayor, or any position in council, member of council or committee member is removed from their position? Like, do we want, you want us to bring forward a policy that outlines that, or the criteria in which to do it? 'Cause I think that's two very different things. If it's just a criteria, we could certainly bring it forward sooner than a policy, if you know what I mean.
I think I want an information report because I think we need to understand how other jurisdictions handle this. And, you know, how they establish their criteria, how they deal with, if a counselor has committed an infraction, you know, what steps do they go through to remedy that first? And then finally, the policy, the procedure for removing someone. So I guess what I'm looking for, I guess, is a staff report.
We would need a motion. I'm just trying to think in my head how we craft that motion to bring that forward. Do you have anything in mind? Like, do you have a motion already pre-crafted or something you could think of for staff to bring back an information report that would outline, fill in the blank? So if you could capture that.
I essentially, yeah, I guess, pardon me, I'm going to fumble with this a little bit because we're trying to do this on the fly here, but I'd look for a staff report to provide examples from other jurisdictions on how, on any policies, again, to remove a counselor from a position appointed by council, including deputy mayor or committee appointments. Citing the criteria, the process, and the policies for removing someone. Process for remedying, and then for removing.
So that's your motion?
Let's see what our CAO comes back with here. If I got it right.
Okay, we'll just hold on 1 second or two, or.
And Councillor, through the chair, did you also want to include committees, like removing councillors from any appointment?
Any appointment,
Okay.
yeah, I think.
If I may ask through the chair, I understand, I think we have the authority through a policy, hopefully, to remove people that we've appointed to committees or positions of deputy mayor. That I would really be interested to know how we would have the authority to remove an elected official of any level, whether it's a councillor or mayor or deputy mayor, from our role as a mayor or deputy mayor. I guess that's my question.
It's not the question, no.
Through the chair, to the mayor, I believe what Councillor Halverson is requesting is an information report on process to remove councillors from any appointments made by council. So to the clerk, if you've captured that well, and I'm looking to you, can I read that out again and they can vote on that motion? Okay, so I'll read it out, and if it's what you want, great. If not, we can amend it. So that council directs staff to bring forward an information report on the process to remove councillors from any appointments made by council. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to make sure it's fulsome, so it does capture.
Yep.
You know, well, but yeah,
The intent there for me is it's left so vague that I can include any appointment that's made by councillor,
Right.
by council of a councillor. So whether it's committees, the deputy mayor, or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we bring forward a comprehensive report on the whole process.
okay. So as I read it, I don't think we have a policy right now, so I think we should have one. So
Not as comprehensive as we'd like.
So it's been moved by Councillor Halverson, the motion that CAO Jamie just read.
sorry, are we waiving notice of motion?
Notice motion, just notice of motion, so we can just,
Yeah, this is coming to next, and this is
so
for
we're
next meeting.
good. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's Councillor Halverson. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to bring? Councillor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. Just hearing some of the questions asked by the public here tonight. And I know staff does answer them. I hear the answers lots of times. Some questions are new, some are old, and we hear them several times. So could the staff prepare like a sheet of, here's what was asked, here's your answers, and that way, they'll be definitively answered for, you know, some of these public questions that come forward in our question period?
Through the chair to good counselor, I think that's very important, and that's typically why we ask for contact information. So if somebody does ask a question, we know how to get information back to them. Typically, they do come see Kayla or myself, and we can respond, and sometimes they see the actual staff member that was doing the presentation. We do that way. What we can do is formalize it a bit more, so those as Paulareni gave us a question sheet, we have a very good idea of what the questions were, so we can properly answer those, and then we can respond as we normally would. So I think you're asking Councillor Mosher just to formalize the process a bit more, and we can do that.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe bring it back to a meeting that we can, you know, hear it like a part of our correspondence that it's, you know, in the
Absolutely.
notes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duggan, do you have anything you'd like to bring forward? Okay, I'm just going around the room. I don't want to leave anyone out. Okay. Deputy Mayor Ernst, Councillor Sanford, Councillor Bertels. Councillor Bertels.
Yes, through the chair, your worship. I would like to take this opportunity to express my reasons for seconding and voting on the motion to have Deputy Mayor Ed Halverson removed from his position. Over the 5-6 weeks, we've had some text messages, communication going back and forth between councillors, mostly between myself and Ed, that made me feel as I was being bullied by Councillor Halverson. I felt that he was being very disrespectful towards me and that my questions, thoughts were useless, especially over and over him saying, "You're not getting it. You don't understand." It got to the point that I had to reach out to Mayor Meyer before the holidays asking how and when do I turn in my laptop, and expressed that I didn't appreciate being bullied by Councillor Halverson. It was suggested that I take the holidays to think things over and then come back and talk. Since then, we came back for our first meeting and this motion came up. Then I knew it wasn't just me. Thanks.
Thank you. So I've asked everyone if they wanted to speak. Hearing nothing else, I'd just like to thank everybody tonight for coming and speaking and staying within their rules and guidelines. It was tough for me to cut a bunch of people off, but that's the rules in place and that's what we're going to follow moving forward. And basically, if there's nothing else, there's no in-camera things tonight on the agenda. So a motion for adjournment would be great. So moved, seconded. Meeting adjourned, folks. Thank you so much. Sure.